Welcome to the Collectability Inspection Methodology video. It is with great pleasure today that we're going to share publicly for the first time our checklist, our methodology of how we look at vintage watches. And hopefully this is useful to you in your treasure hunt, in the pieces that you come across. It's a simple way of how to look at each component of the watch and essentially use it as a checklist before you go ahead and purchase a piece, or frankly, you could use this checklist to go through your own watches. The purpose of this video is twofold. Number one, we're going to share the inspection methodology. But the second point is we're going to reveal for the first time a reference 130 in stainless steel from 1938 with a sector dial. So over the next few minutes, we're going to dig deep into each component of this watch and discuss how to inspect the watch. But at the same time, we have a fun watch that we'll be looking at. So first, when you come across a vintage watch, in order to inspect it, first, you might want to put it on the wrist. See, how does it look and how does it feel on the wrist? Does the size and the thickness and the overall aesthetic work for you? And could you imagine it as part of your collection? Next, you might want to check the lugs and the case back with a quick visual inspection. And then you want to check the functionality of the watch. This part's quite fun. You want to wind the timepiece. Make sure the mainspring is holding its power. Here we have a chronograph, so we want to check that the start works, and then the stop works, and then the reset button works back to 0, just so you're comfortable knowing that the basic functions are working as expected. And now the inspection begins in greater detail. But the order of operations, we'll call it, of how you inspect a watch is very important. This is the acronym that I use to remember to check everything, and that is CDM-SBC. It could be easily remembered with this simple sentence. Collectability demands memorizing some basic caveats. So here we are, CDM-SBC, and what it stands for. C is for case, D is for dial, M is for movement, S is for strap, B is for buckle, and finally, C is for crystal. As long as you hit the basics, you're going to be able to not only appreciate your watches or the watches that you're looking at purchasing, you're going to be able to remember the basic checklist of what to look at. All right, so let's get started. C is for case. So when you look at a case, the first thing to do is to inspect the bezel and see if it's been polished in the shape compared to other known versions. It's very important to compare and contrast. And then you want to look at the side of the case and study the finish. In this case, we have a beautiful brushed finish. And then the case back, look for signs if it's been engraved, and then have your overall opinion on the condition of the case. And with this particular watch, it is absolutely stunning. From 1938, this steel case has proved the test of time in a beautiful way. We're now going to move on to the dial. So D for dial is very important because over 80% of the value of a vintage watch is in its dial and its originality. So when looking at the dial, I'm always looking very closely at the topography of the dial. And that is how the raised enamel sits on the plane of the dial itself. Here we have from the 1930s, one of the masterpieces of dial design, this Patek Philippe made by Stern Frere dial with a sector fully engraved. All the circles of the sector are hand engraved. The numbers are engraved, and the full tachometer is also fully engraved. And when you look closely, you could actually see the raised enamel on the dial. And that's very, very important because what you're really assessing is how much restoration, if any, has been done to the dial. And here we see the original varnish is aged to this beautiful yellow tone. Once the dial has been inspected and the case has been inspected, here's where we look inside to see the movement. And it's very important to ask for a trusted watchmaker to open the watch. I don't have a watchmaker here today, but I am comfortable opening a case back. And for those of you who are comfortable opening watches, I recommend using a piece of plastic on a sharp blade in order to protect the metal as you open the case back. If you use metal on metal, you're asking for a scratch. And having that plastic protection makes it quite easy to open the case back without risk of scratching the case. As you can see, it opened rather easily, and now we can see the marvel within. Before we go on to the movement, I'd like to go back to the case and look at the inside of the case in more detail, because there are some secret marks that you may or may not know about that are inside almost every Patek Philippe case. First, you have the name of the company, of course. We have Patek Philippe and Co. Genève, and then it's stamped Swiss. And then it's late 1930s, the proper marks for a steel case at this time. We see acier, meaning steel, inexorable, and then stay bright. Underneath, we have the case number, 505207. And the last number underneath is 17. That's a batch number. And the 17 means that there is a batch of at least 17 cases made in this batch from the case maker, which with this watch was Dubois. Now we go through M for movement. And we already have some power in the gear train, so we're able to look at the escapement ticking away. So when inspecting a movement, there's a few things that you're looking at with scrutiny. First, you want to check if there's been any water damage or any obvious oxidation that you should know about. The second thing you want to look at is the condition of the screws. You can learn a lot about a watch by the condition of the screws and determine how many people have been in this watch before and what's been done. I'm also looking at the signature, the Patek Philippe signature on the watch. I'm looking, in this case, at the micrometer, at the fast-slow adjustment, and I'm looking closely at the all of the steel parts of the chronograph. To properly assess a vintage movement, it's very important to compare and contrast against other known examples so that you could find maybe some surprising variations with your watch, or unfortunately, you could sometimes find some problems when things don't look quite right. The other thing I'd like to bring up when looking at the movement is, does the age of the movement and the age of the case and the age of the dial, have they all aged the same level? Sometimes when you see a movement that looks like it was restored yesterday, but a dial that shows a lot of age, you start to ask some questions. So it's important with the case dial and movement to find consistency in the way that those pieces have all aged. So once you're done inspecting the movement, you have the watchmaker, or you, if you know what you're doing, carefully place the case back on the watch and snap it into place. So after CDM, we have S, which stands for strap. In this case, we have a modern strap, a non-Patek Philippe strap. And everyone knows straps are the most fun, easiest part of a watch to exchange. And for this watch in particular, I'd love to find a vintage late 1930s strap to replace it. So after we look at the case, the dial, the movement, the strap, the next thing that we want to look at is the buckle. So we're up to B. With the buckle, you want to check the signature of the company. In some cases, it even has a signature or initials of the retailer. And once you check out the strap in the metal, you want to make sure it matches the watch itself. In this case, we have a steel buckle on a steel watch. That is very important to note. But straps and buckles are not the most important bits of a watch. They're always easily replaced. Last, and this is the part that many forget, is C for crystal. I always recommend taking a look at the profile of the crystal, checking what material the crystal is, and you could learn a lot about a crystal's material by its temperature. Like, I could feel this crystal is quite warm, so I know it's a polymer. It's a plastic crystal, which is correct for the period. If you feel a sapphire crystal, it's much, much colder. So once you go through this entire process, you have an overview of the condition of the watch. I encourage you to take pictures along the way of that process. For example, if this watch needed an extract from the archives, we would want pictures of the inside case back, the movement, the dial, and we'd send those pictures on to Patek Philippe to order one of these documents, which is called the extract from the archives. This is a copy of the birth certificate of the watch. It has the movement number, it has the case number, it has a description of the dial, the year it was made, 1938, and the actual day it was originally sold. Here, September 14th, 1938. Very important to have documentation to know the consistency of age makes sense for any watch that you're considering so that you can make an informed buying decision. And this part is very key. The early bird often does get warm. You need to be ready to make an offer once you've completed your inspection. If it's a watch you want, don't sit on the sidelines because you might lose it quite quickly. I've lost a few watches over the years, taking my time, thinking about it. But if it's a watch that speaks to your heart and mind, go for it. It's time to buy, it's time to step up, and it's time to acquire that new treasure for your collection. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe on YouTube and Instagram. In the meantime, enjoy the hunt.